Peace be with you. I'm. Today is Creationism versus Evolutionism, Lecture 4, Theological and Ethical Implications, Death Before Sin and the Gospel. We shift from science to theology, covering soteriology, God's attributes, and ethics. This concerns the Gospel's foundation. There is a link in the description to my Patreon, where you can find in-depth reflection questions and discussion materials related to this lecture. Alright, let's get started. In the previous episode, Lecture 3, we took a detailed look at the scientific evidence challenging the old Earth theory. We saw that radiometric dating methods are based on 3 unverifiable assumptions and have repeatedly failed when applied to rocks of known age. We explored 6 strong scientific evidences, including carbon-14 in diamonds, lunar recession, the decay of Earth's magnetic field, dinosaur soft tissue, population growth patterns, and tightly folded rock layers. We also took an in-depth look at Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption and how it formed complex geological structures in a short period of time, demonstrating that strata can form rapidly and do not require millions of years. All of this evidence consistently points to one conclusion: the Earth is much younger than the billions of years claimed by evolutionists, and perfectly aligns with the roughly 6,000-year timeframe taught in the Bible. But some may ask, even if the Bible teaches a young Earth and scientific evidence supports it, why is this issue so important? Can't we accept that God created all things through millions of years of evolution? Isn't this just a difference in the length of time? The answer is, it's absolutely not just a matter of time. Accepting a worldview of millions of years fundamentally undermines the Bible's teachings about God's character, the nature of sin, the origin of death, and the redemptive work of Christ. This is not an academic debate, but a serious issue concerning the core truths of the gospel. In this lecture, we will explore the issue of death before sin, which is the most fundamental theological conflict between young Earth creationism and all old Earth perspectives, including old Earth creationism and theistic evolution. From Genesis to Revelation, the Bible consistently teaches that death entered the world because of Adam's sin. Genesis 2:17, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." This clearly reveals 3 important truths. First, death was not part of creation. Second, death is the consequence of disobeying God's command. Third, before Adam sinned, death did not exist. Genesis 3:19, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return." Death is part of the curse, a punishment brought by sin, not part of God's original design in creation. Paul's theology is built on a parallel structure between Adam and Christ. Romans 5:12, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned." Romans 5:17, "For if, by the trespass of the one man, death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ?" Paul's argument is built on the following logical chain. Adam's sin led to death entering the world, and everyone dies in Adam. Christ's obedience brought life into the world, and all believers live in Christ. This parallel structure is at the heart of the gospel. If the first Adam had not brought death into the world, then there would have been no need for the second Adam, Christ, to come and reverse death. Open parenthesis 1 Corinthians 15:21-22 close parenthesis, "For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive." If death did not come as a result of Adam's sin, then the entire logic of the resurrection falls apart. Death's effects reach beyond humanity. Romans 8:19 says creation waits in longing for God's children to be revealed. Creation was subjected to frustration, not by choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. Yet creation hopes to be liberated from bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of God's children. We know the whole creation has been groaning as in childbirth until now. The entire created world is under the bondage of decay, groaning and suffering, and this is because of Adam's fall. Even the death of animals is part of the curse. Both evolution and the view that accepts millions of years must claim that there were hundreds of millions of years of death, disease, suffering, and extinction before humans appeared. Evolutionists interpret the fossil record as representing hundreds of millions of years of history. About 540 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, there were trilobites and other marine creatures. Around 200 million years ago, during the Jurassic period, dinosaurs ruled the Earth. About 65 million years ago, mammals began to rise during the Cenozoic era. All of these fossils are evidence of death. If these fossils were formed hundreds of millions of years ago, then there would have already been hundreds of millions of years of death and disease before Adam sinned. Disease, traces of cancer, arthritis, and other illnesses have been found in fossils. Violence, predator-prey relationships, and extinction. 99% of all species have gone extinct. If one accepts evolution or the old Earth view, then the following theological dilemmas must be faced. The first dilemma is that God uses death as a tool for creation. Evolution claims that only the fittest survive, which means that God created new species through hundreds of millions of years of death, suffering, and extinction. This is completely contrary to the biblical teaching that God is the source of life. John 1:4, "In him was life, and that life was the light of men." The second dilemma is that death is not the consequence of sin. If there had already been hundreds of millions of years of death before Adam sinned, then death is not the consequence of sin, but rather a part of the natural order. This directly contradicts the teaching of Romans 5:12. The third dilemma is that God would be calling death very good. Genesis 1:31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. If, at the end of the sixth day, the earth was already filled with hundreds of millions of years of animal corpses and fossils, how could God call such a death-filled world very good? The fourth dilemma is that Christ's redemption becomes unnecessary. If death is not the consequence of sin, then Christ's coming to reverse death loses its meaning. The logical foundation of salvation is destroyed. Theistic evolution attempts to reconcile the Bible with evolution, claiming that God created through the process of evolution. But this kind of compromise is theologically disastrous. First, it distorts the attributes of God. If God chose to use hundreds of millions of years of death, suffering, disease, violence, and extinction as his method of creation, this would be completely inconsistent with the loving, omnipotent, and wise God revealed in the Bible. Psalm 145 verse 9, "The Lord is good to all, his compassion rests on all he has made." Why would a truly loving and omnipotent God not be able to create all things directly, instantly, and perfectly as described in the Bible, but instead have to use a long, cruel process of trial and error? James chapter 1 verse 17, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." Secondly, this undermines the doctrine of redemption. Theistic evolution often denies that Adam was a real historical figure, instead viewing him as a symbol or representative. But the New Testament authors clearly regard Adam as a historical person. Luke chapter 3 verse 38, "Enosh was the son of Seth, Seth was the son of Adam, Adam was the son of God." Luke includes Adam in the genealogy of Jesus, listing him alongside historical figures such as Abraham and David. Open parenthesis, 1 Timothy 2:13-14, close parenthesis, "For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. When tempted, it was the woman who was deceived and fell into sin." In his teachings, Paul regarded Adam and Eve as real historical figures. If Adam were not real, then the theological argument in Romans 5:12-21 would lose its foundation. The argument for resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15:21-22 would collapse, and Christ coming as the last Adam would lose its meaning. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. The term very good in Hebrew is tov meod, which is a very strong expression, meaning perfect, complete, and without flaw. This evaluation was given at the end of the sixth day, when all plants, animals, and humans had been created, and before sin had entered the world, there was no death, disease, or suffering yet. If, at that time, the earth already contained animal fossils from hundreds of millions of years, traces of disease, and evidence of violence, how could God have called it very good? In the original creation, all animals, including humans, were vegetarians. Genesis 1:29-30, God said, "Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, to all land creatures with the breath of life, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. There was no predator and prey, no survival of the fittest. This opposes the mechanism of evolution, where survival of the fittest and natural selection drive the process. The fall brought about a universal curse. Genesis 3:17-18, "And to Adam he said, Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, You must not eat from it. From the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. The curse not only affected humanity, but also the entire created world. The land became difficult to cultivate. Thorns and thistles, symbols of hostility and suffering, began to appear. Animals began to prey on one another. We can infer that, just as God allowed humans to eat meat after Noah came out of the ark, Genesis 9:3, the dietary habits of animals also changed after the fall. Romans 5:14, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who did not sin in the same way as Adam. Death became a tyrant, ruling over all humanity. This was not God's original design, but a terrible consequence brought about by sin. Christ's work of redemption is not only to save humanity from sin, but also to reverse the entire curse and restore the original perfect creation. Galatians 3:13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. Christ bore the curse brought by Adam on the cross. You wore a crown of thorns, these are the thorns from Genesis 3:18, and experienced death, which is the return to dust from Genesis 3:19, all in order to reverse all of this. Revelation 21:4, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, nor sorrow, crying, or pain, for the former things have passed away. Revelation 22:3, and there will no longer be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. The new heaven and new earth will be restored to the state of Eden, with no death, no pain, and no curse. This proves that these things were not part of God's original design. Accepting evolution is not only a theological issue, but also has profound ethical and social consequences. If humans evolved from apes, then the difference between humans and animals is only a matter of degree, not of essence. This leads to the loss of humanity's special status, the undermining of the foundation of human rights, and the rise of moral relativism. Genesis 1:26-27, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. The Bible clearly teaches that humans are uniquely created in the image of God, possessing unique value, dignity, and moral status. Evolutionary theory has been used to justify many moral evils throughout history. In the early 20th century, the eugenics movement, based on the idea of survival of the fittest, arose in the United States and Europe. They forcibly sterilized so-called unfit individuals, including people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and mental illnesses. Nazi Germany took this to the extreme, leading to the Holocaust. Charles Darwin's book, The Descent of Man, has the subtitle The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, and contains overtly racist content. Certain races were regarded as closer to apes, which was used to justify colonialism and slavery. The social Darwinism of the survival of the fittest was applied to economic and political spheres, rationalizing capitalist exploitation and imperialist aggression. If humans are merely the product of a blind evolutionary process, then moral concepts are just psychological adaptations that aid survival, rather than objective truths. This means there is no absolute good or evil. Morality is merely a social convention, and everyone can determine their own moral standards. This has led to moral confusion in contemporary Western society. Abortion has been legalized because fetuses are not regarded as complete human beings. Euthanasia has been legalized because the value of life is seen as dependent on its quality. Sexual morality has collapsed because traditional views of marriage are considered outdated. Ecclesiastes 1:2, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. If evolution is true, then life has no ultimate purpose or meaning. We are merely accidental products of the universe. After death, nothing exists. Life has no eternal value. This leads to a widespread sense of nihilism and despair in modern society. In contrast, young Earth creationism provides a solid moral foundation. Everyone is created in the image of God and possesses inherent value. Murder is an absolute evil because it harms the image of God, Genesis 9:6. All races are equal because they all originate from Adam and Eve. Good and evil are objective, determined by God's holy nature. Moral law is not invented by humans, but revealed by God. We are accountable to God. Micah 6:8, He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. We were created with a purpose to glorify God. Life has eternal significance. Our choices have eternal consequences. Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord. Not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Before we finish, let's address some important questions. Some people ask, did animals really not die before the fall? What about plants? This is an important question of biblical interpretation. Regarding the death of animals, Romans chapter 8, verses 19-22, clearly states that creation, including animals, is subject to decay because of the fall of man. Genesis 1:30 says that, in the beginning, animals all ate plants, there were no carnivores. This strongly suggests that there was no animal death before the fall. As for plants, the Bible uses the word life in Hebrew, nephesh chaya, meaning living creature with breath, to describe animals and humans, but not plants. Eating plants is not considered death, but rather harvesting. Plants are designed to be eaten, and they reproduce through seeds and fruit. Leviticus 17:11, for the life of a creature is in the blood. Plants have no blood, so they are not included in the theological category of death. If there was no death before the fall, did carnivores develop their sharp teeth and claws only afterward? The answer is, not necessarily. Many features that appear predatory can actually serve other purposes. Giant pandas have sharp teeth and strong jaws, but they only eat bamboo. Fruit bats have sharp teeth, but they only eat fruit. Modern vegetarian dogs still have the teeth of carnivores, but they can eat a plant-based diet. After the fall, these features may have been repurposed for predation, but they might originally have been used for tearing open tough fruit shells, for defense, or for processing plant fibers. Creationist biologists believe that after the fall, changes in gene expression caused some animals to become carnivorous. This does not require new genetic mutations, but simply a re-regulation of existing genes. Why is there evidence of diseases like cancer and arthritis in the fossil record? Doesn't this prove that diseases existed before the fall? The answer is that all these fossils were buried by Noah's flood, which happened after the fall. The timeline according to flood geology is as follows. The first to sixth days of creation week were perfect, with no disease. From Adam's fall to Noah's flood, over 1,600 years, death and disease began. During the flood, fossils formed, including diseased animals. From the flood's end to now, some 4,300 years passed, today's geological era. The evidence of disease in the fossil record proves that these animals lived in a world after the fall but before being buried by the flood. This is entirely consistent with the young earth creationist timeline. The Bible says that God causes the sun to rise on the good and the evil alike, Matthew 5:45. Doesn't this mean that God's way of creating includes suffering? The answer is that this verse is talking about the world after the fall, not the original creation. The key distinction is that the original creation was perfect, without sin, without suffering, and without death. It was very good. The world after the fall is under a curse, filled with sin, suffering, and death. It is marked by toil and groaning. God still shows grace to everyone in the world after the fall, including the wicked, but this does not mean that suffering and death were part of his original design for creation. James 1:13, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. God is not the creator of sin, suffering, or death. These are the consequences of sin. And they are a corruption of God's good creation. Can Christians who accept evolution or an old earth still be saved? Are they not Christians? This is a question that requires a careful and loving answer. Ephesians 2:8-9, for it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, not through a correct understanding of creationism. Many sincere Christians who love the Lord and believe in the core truths of the gospel hold different views on the issue of creation. However, compromise carries its dangers. First, logical inconsistency. Christians who accept theistic evolution or old earth creationism are theologically inconsistent. They attempt to reconcile the authority of the Bible with human theories, which, in the long run, undermines the authority of Scripture. Second, the foundation of the gospel is weakened. If death is not the consequence of sin, the logic of the gospel collapses. This may not immediately affect an individual's salvation, but it will impact the preaching of the gospel and the faith of the next generation. Third, spiritual harm. Many young people have left the faith because the church accepts evolution, believing that the Bible is unreliable. A compromising stance may seem peaceful in the short term, but in the long run, it causes great loss. 1 Peter 3:15, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord." Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect. We should defend young earth creationism with love and humility, while also respecting those with differing views. At the same time, we must highlight the theological dangers of compromise. Why wasn't this issue a point of contention in the early church? The answer is simple. Before the rise of geology and Darwinian evolution in the 19th century, almost all Christians accepted young earth creationism. It wasn't a debate because no one challenged it. Historical evidence shows that early church fathers, such as Basil and Augustine, believed in a literal six-day creation. The medieval church accepted a young earth. Prominent Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin also believed in the concept of young earth creationism. Break time equals 0.5s/. Furthermore, renowned 17th and 18th century scientists, such as Sir Isaac Newton and Michael Faraday, also widely accepted the idea of a young earth. It wasn't until the 19th century, with Charles Lyell's uniformitarian geology and Darwin's theory of evolution, that this consensus was challenged. Many Christians began to compromise, attempting to reconcile the Bible with the new so-called science. This shows that young earth creationism is not a modern invention, but rather a historic Christian orthodoxy. It is the compromised positions, such as old earth creationism and theistic evolution, that are actually modern responses to the pressures of secular science. What should I do if my church or school teaches theistic evolution or old earth creationism? Here are some practical suggestions. First, study deeply. Read resources on young earth creationism, such as Answers in Genesis, ICR, and CMI. Study the Bible and be convinced of the biblical foundation for young earth creationism. Understand the weaknesses of evolution and the scientific evidence for young earth creationism. Second, remain respectful. Do not immediately become confrontational or create conflict. 2 Timothy 2:24-25, "The Lord's servant must not quarrel but be kind to all, able to teach, not resentful." Gently instruct opponents. Third, ask kind questions. At the right time, guide their thinking by asking questions. For example, if death existed before Adam sinned, how do we explain Romans 5:12? Why would God use millions of years of pain and death to create if He is all-powerful? Fourth, seek support. Connect with Christians who share the same viewpoint. Attend creationist conferences and seminars. Share young earth creationist resources in your church or fellowship group. Fifth, pray. James 1:5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him." Pray and ask the Lord for wisdom, love, and courage to stand firm in the truth. In this lecture, we explored the profound impact that accepting the view of millions of years of history has on Christian theology. First, the problem of death before sin. If there were hundreds of millions of years of death before Adam sinned, then death is not the consequence of sin. This destroys the theological foundation of Romans 5:12 and 1 Corinthians 15:21-22. Second, the attributes of God are called into question. A God who uses hundreds of millions of years of pain and death as a method of creation is not the loving, omnipotent, and wise God revealed in the Bible. Third, very good becomes meaningless. If, at the time of Genesis 1:31, the earth was already filled with hundreds of millions of years worth of fossils, that is, evidence of death, then the evaluation of very good is false. Fourth, the doctrine of redemption collapses. If Adam was not a historical figure, or if death was not the consequence of sin, then Christ's work of redemption loses its foundation. Fifth, ethical consequences. Accepting evolution leads to the loss of human dignity, moral relativism, and social disaster. Young earth creationism is not just a matter of biblical interpretation, but a necessary stance to uphold the truth of the gospel. Accepting any form of evolution or an old earth view creates irreconcilable theological contradictions, ultimately undermining the authority of the Bible and the message of the gospel. We have already seen that accepting evolution is theologically disastrous. But is evolution itself tenable as a scientific theory? In the fifth lecture, we will take an in-depth look at the fundamental dilemmas faced by evolution, especially the challenges regarding the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the laws of thermodynamics. We will see that evolution is not only in conflict with the Bible, but also with observational science. Evolution requires us to believe that the universe naturally arose from absolute nothingness, that life spontaneously emerged from non-living matter, contradicting the law of biogenesis, and that order spontaneously arose from chaos, contradicting the second law of thermodynamics. These are not minor issues, but fatal dilemmas that evolution is fundamentally unable to resolve. Let us continue our exploration. My channel aims to focus on topics that are difficult for churches to delve into, or subjects that are more complex, perhaps a bit dry, but nonetheless extremely important. Fellowships or Sunday schools are very welcome to use these videos. If you need any specific topics, feel free to let me know. I can also provide some training support. For some frequently asked questions and reflections, there are links in the description to my Patreon members area for your reference and deeper understanding. If you want to know more about today's information or other content, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you all for your support. I hope you can subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this channel to help it continue and to learn more. You can also visit my Patreon. Let us get to know God together, reflect on our faith, and live out Christ.